Hi everyone.
Hey.
Hopefully you can hear us this time. It's me, I'm April, the Communications Coordinator, and I'm joined today with Misha, our Executive Director. And today we're going to be talking about the budget. The budgets are going to be released next week, so it's a good time to kind of get a refresher on that. So we'll be sharing about the budget process, kind of what we're looking for, and then also kind of how people can get involved in the process. I'll be tracking questions live on the Facebook stream, so I might be looking back and forth here a little bit. So if you have questions, please do feel free to ask. So yeah, and what I wanted to do to set up the conversation too is we just got the revenue forecast yesterday and we posted about it, and we posted this graphic that was, I think for me, it was a pretty good illustration of how far our revenue is from actually providing the needs of our communities. So before we really get into all the budget conversation, I'd really like to get a sense for what that revenue means or what the revenue forecast means and how it sets us up for the budget process.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for having this conversation. So yesterday is like a big day for us at the Budget and Policy Center and for the budget writers. It was the day when the official forecast came out of how much revenue the legislature can expect to have as they're writing their budget for the upcoming biennium for the next 2 years. And this is like that key piece of information that they need to be able to kind of finalize the budget proposals, put them all together, and then release them next week. So if you saw the news, in April you saw it, the news was that the legislature has $553 million more than they had expected to work with when they're writing their budget this year. And that sounds like a lot of money, and for my budget, certainly, for our organization. But when it comes to kind of meeting the needs of all people all across Washington State, the number of kids in our public schools and the investments that we've been making over the past few years, from the McCleary decision to really make sure that kids are set up for success, to mental health needs and healthcare needs, to funding for parks. It's actually a really, really small amount of money in comparison to the size of the state budget. And so this chart that Andy Nicholas and Kelly Smith worked on, if you can see it, what it really shows is that basically the new revenue that came in that was anticipated based on yesterday's forecast is a really kind of a drop in the bucket, even compared to what's needed to basically make these community investments that were proposed in the governor's proposal. So it sounds like a lot of money, but you've got to put it in context compared to the size of the state budget, compared to the need. And what we know from the revenue forecast is that it doesn't fundamentally change the picture of what the legislature is trying to do when they put together their budget this year. They still face a shortfall between what they want to be able to invest in, to set up kids for success, to fund our parks, to fund healthcare, all of those things that make our community strong, and the amount of revenue based on our current tax code that's expected to come in.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about this, that I've been working in public policy now for like a little bit over 10 years in different capacities, and most of my work around public policy has been more focused on the policies and not so much how it's funded, maybe like a little bit here and there. But even after all this time, we've always kind of turned to the Budget and Policy Center for that real deep analysis. And it just feels like it's still so opaque and hard to understand, really complicated. So it would be great for us to share at this point, like what's now that we have this final piece with the revenue, how do we now get ready for the budget process, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So, people have been working all legislative session on different policy bills, trying to move them through the different chambers and get them to be adopted by the legislature. And any piece of legislation that costs any money, there basically is language in it that it doesn't go into effect unless the money is appropriated in the budget. So everything we believe at the Budget and Policy Center, everything that we care about that the legislature is doing this year that costs money, it ultimately comes down to this massive bill, the state budget bill, to determine whether that thing is moving forward. Because we all know it's like, one thing to say, okay, we believe in childcare and we want to make sure people have affordable childcare. And it's another thing to actually put the money behind it to make sure that people's needs are being taken care of across the state. And so that's why the budget is so important. So the budget, when it comes out, it's hundreds of pages long. It touches every element of our lives, from, the education system to childcare, which I just mentioned, to all of the different things that we rely on, and, libraries and ways that we touch state government. That is, again, just that really important bill. Probably, I would argue, the most important bill the legislature will act on this session, because of the impact on communities.
So what's happening next week?
Yeah, great question. So next week, the House and the Senate each release their budget proposals. We expect the House proposal could come out as early as Monday. The Senate proposal will be later in the week. They put those out there, and then they're actually going to have public hearings on them and start to consider changes to them. And they're working really hard to get everything agreed upon and finalized by April 28th, which is the last day of the legislative session. So next week is going to be really important. We'll see for the first time those budgets that they've been working on for months.
And what are we looking at when those budgets get released, and in terms of just what's in it, but also how it impacts our key priorities?
Yeah, so we look really across the whole budget to see, does it equitably invest in the things that make our community strong? So we're not, at the Budget and Policy Center, we're not looking deep in one specific area. We're looking kind of across the board at what does this mean big picture for our state and for our communities. And then we pay a lot of attention to the tax code side of it. We know that every dollar that they're spending in the state budget, it comes from our state tax code. And we all know that Washington has the most upside down tax code in the country, where low-income people are paying so much greater share of their income than the wealthiest. So we're going to be really looking to see, is the legislature going to tackle that finally this year? Are they going to do things like closing the tax break on capital gains? Are they going to enact a working families tax credit? And also, I have to say, we also have to look, are they going to make it worse? So are they going to actually put forward new tax breaks and other things that kind of continue to make our tax code not really sustainable for the state?
So we have this huge bill that's hundreds of pages. It's pretty dense, has a lot of information. How do we, as constituents, interact with the bill? And you mentioned there's going to be public hearings. How do we actually engage in the process?
Yeah, so when the budgets come out, they'll actually put them online. So, first, folks can actually read the bills themselves and the materials that the legislature put out. As I mentioned, they're really long and a little bit convoluted. So I think, one really big recommendation I would have is to look at those intermediary partner organizations that are working in specific issue areas. So we'll have analysis we put out from the Budget and Policy Center, but also, look to groups like Children's Alliance, or I have this little cup from the Statewide Poverty Action Network, who's, really tracking different issues in more detail. If you care about, what does the budget mean for immigrant families, check out One America. They'll put out the information on their Facebook page. They'll put it out on Twitter. They'll release an email to their list, and they'll be able to really tell you, based on the information and their policy analysis, what does it mean in detail for the priorities of a particular organization. So I would definitely get the information those different ways. I'd also mention, you can call your state legislator, and we'll talk about that later, but they're there pouring through the budget as well, and they can help answer questions.
Yeah, I think that, one of the first ways I got involved in public policy was as a legislative assistant, and I went through 2 sessions, and one of the things that was my favorite part of my job was having a phone call come in from a constituent, because we deal a lot with advocates and lobbyists that really know the process. And they kind of already know what they're doing. They don't need to interact with me too much, but it was nice when I was down there to hear from people who were actually living in our district, the communities that were being impacted by these policies. So if you're listening and you kind of feel like it's intimidating to call your representative or senator, it's really not. We're nice, I promise. Well, I was there and I was nice. And it's nice to be able to also ask a specific question. So when you're calling, instead of saying making a statement like I want my member of the House to support something, if you ask them specifically a question like, what is Senator so-and-so's, position on capital gains tax, for instance? If you ask that open-ended question, it actually invites a conversation, and I think it makes it a little bit easier to really engage and get to the bottom of what your representative actually feels about a specific policy. I just wanted to pause for a sec and check out a question from the Facebook Live. So there's a question around,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I don't think so the question is, if you can't see it, they actually want to have an agreement on the budget before the end of session. So how does that actually, like, in terms of the process too, like, how does that actually play out in terms of trying to end on time versus having a budget where there's agreement?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's a little sarcastic, I think. You know, they're trying to really reach this April 28th deadline to have everything wrapped up so legislators can go back to their communities and they can really be done kind of with the regular schedule. We've known, you know, for a number of years the legislature hasn't been able to finish on time, and so they've extended, and so the reference is going into June for extra special sessions. And, you know, I have kind of an unpopular opinion on this because I really don't care when they end. I don't care if they end at the end of April. I don't care if it's May. I don't care if it's June, as long as they're really writing a budget that reflects the values of Washington State. So I think they're going to get things done by April 28th. But I'd rather them stay into May if it means writing a budget that really addresses the equity issues in our tax code and makes the investments that we need, rather than trying to rush and get done and write something that, you know, they're going to have to come back and fix later. So they definitely don't like staying late then, so they'll probably be trying to wrap up by the 28th.
Yeah, there'll be kind of a balance. So we wanted to keep this live chat a little bit on the shorter end. Is there anything else you want to share about either like what's in the budget or the process before we wrap up?
I think just a reminder that, you know, there's a bunch of different ways you can make your voice heard, as we all know, after the budgets come out, and even before the budgets come out. But April, you talked about, you know, calling and being in touch with legislators. You can also email your legislators. There's going to be opportunities for testimony, public testimony for folks that can make it to Olympia. And I would say, you know, continuing to engage with those partner organizations. I always look, you know, at the different organizations will basically set up, you know, easy ways for you to contact your legislature, right? And so it might be, if you care about childcare, you can go to the Early Learning Action Alliance and they'll have everything set up for you. So you can just, you know, ping out a message to your legislature and join with hundreds and maybe thousands of other people. Moms Rising does great work like that as well. And so I would just really encourage folks to connect with the organizations that are working most on the things that you care about, and take action, because this is not a time that the legislature should be doing this work kind of in the cone of silence with none of our voices in the mix, right? We should be letting them know when things are really awesome, like great job, that's really awesome that you're investing in this area, or hey, I don't like this piece of it, let's do it differently.
Yeah, I really appreciate that too. Like, there are opportunities for us to get involved, and so we should look out for those opportunities and really take advantage of them. And speaking of opportunities to get involved, down in Olympia, it's going to be busy, but there's also going to be an opportunity to, if you're down in Olympia, meet at the Sundial at 11:45 for the Working Families Tax Credit Rally. There are some partners getting together who provide an opportunity to get involved and share stories around how the Working Families Tax Credit could really benefit the communities in Washington. So if you're in Olympia, check it out. If you're not in Olympia, you can check it out on Facebook. So we're going to be live streaming it from Fuse. So Fuse will have the stream going, and then we'll share it out also, so you can check it out that way. But thank you so much for sharing about the budget. Thanks for joining us on the Facebook Live. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. If you have any questions about the budget that we didn't address, please reach out to us on email or even on social media. The email address is bnpinfo@budgetandpolicy.org. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.